Hello and welcome to the Redaction Politics show. I'm your host Declan Carey, and as usual, I'm joined by James Moles, our contributing editor. Guys, how are we doing today?
I'm not doing too bad. One thing I just had to do to prepare for this podcast, though, was Nigel Farage recently tweeted, "The silent majority has begun to stand up against this cultural Marxist revolution," in reference to like the BBC and the prom plans. And obviously, people have been backlashing against him, saying, cultural Marxist is an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. But in order to try and find this tweet again, just to look it up for this podcast, I had to Google Nigel Farage cultural Marxist. I dread to think what watch lists I'm about to end up on now.
Yeah. And I mean, not explicitly, but like silent majority is also like incredibly fascistic rhetoric to use. The idea that there's a massive number of people who all secretly agree with you, but they're too afraid to say it because they've been silenced by some power from above.
What is it with cultural Marxism that people on the right seem to be obsessed about? It's a really weird thing that is kind of really vague and meaningless.
Well, there was a similar original with the original Nazis. What was it? They called it cultural Bolshevism.
Yeah.
And basically this anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that there's this group of left-wing Jewish intellectuals that are trying to undermine their culture, undermine, the German race, the German Übermensch, as they would call it. And you see a similar thing today, which gets dog whistled as undermining Western culture. In other words, we know what they're getting at.
Attacks on culture are really easy to sort of dog whistle about because there's pretty much no material reality to them, and therefore you can make them be whatever you want them to be.
Yeah, well, if you're listening today for the first time, we don't always start with reference to Nigel Farage, so don't worry too much about that.
I tell you what, I saw earlier, I think there's something like a stream Nigel Farage and Douglas Murray are doing. I'll just see if I can find that. But I just thought earlier, I would rather remove my own fingernails with a bottle opener than listen to that.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, before we get into the main show, there's this one thing I wanted to bring up because you probably saw the really sad news, which was the death of Chadwick Boseman recently. I mean, what a big loss that has been. An actor who made a big difference with his films. I was really shocked and saddened to hear it. I don't know. How did you guys feel about it?
Well, it was heartbreaking. Obviously, he was Black Panther, which is a film that's inspired so many people. He played Jackie Robinson, didn't he, in the film 42?
Yeah, that's a great film.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, massively talented actor, really heartbreaking loss. That he was age 43, only 43, and died of colon cancer. I mean, what more can he say? But rest in power.
Yeah, I was really surprised how long he had colon cancer for, because he'd made quite a few films whilst having it, which is just an unbelievable thing to think about. To record a film, shoot a film, alongside having treatment for that is such a difficult thing to go through. So, yeah, we've really sort of lost a gem with that one.
And, of course, I think it was 2016, they said he'd had it since. I mean, that means he'd have been shooting Black Panther when he knew he had colon cancer.
Yeah, exactly. So really sad to hear about that. All right, then. What kind of things have been in the news recently, guys, that have caught your attention?
I mean, in my timeline, this is a bit speculative, but I've been seeing a lot more coverage of the BLM riots over the past week because obviously there's been both another police shooting and another active shooter attacking the protesters. And the way that I've seen coverage of both events being covered, I am increasingly worried that the tide is starting to turn on public opinion.
Turn which way?
Turn against the protests. So obviously there's still a massive amount of momentum behind them, but I think there's an increasing amount of rhetoric going towards the idea that, or an increasing amount of pushback, I guess, against it. So I pulled up in preparation for this a tweet from The Times describing the Kenosha shooter who shot 3 people and killed 2 of them as a quote, quoting the exact words, he was a bullied teenager who revered the police and found purpose as a vigilante. That isn't the normal rhetoric that's used to describe a mass shooter.
No.
That's the rhetoric that you use to describe a martyr. The tweet they put out didn't even describe him as the shooter. It just describes that he was being charged with murder after 2 people were killed in his vicinity. And I don't think this is an isolated case. The Daily Mail ran an article about how Joseph Rosenbaum, before having his lung perforated by the shooter, was caught on video saying the N-word. And, while they'd never be as overt as to say he deserved it because of that, they're willing to let the implication hang there for an awkwardly long time.
Yeah, of course, the shooting of Jacob Blake, right, in Wisconsin, who was shot 7 times in the back. There's a video online about that, and I watched what happens in the moments before that happened, and it's really odd because it just doesn't look like there's any intention that anything violent is going to happen, apart from the cops who are following him and have guns pointed to him. And I just can't help but feel that if that was in the UK, it would have been de-escalated in some way, that it would have been calmed down before it got to that point.
Look, most police officers in the UK don't carry guns, they carry tasers. And there are plenty of clips out there you'll find of police tasing people, especially people of colour.
That's true enough. The police in the UK have their own issues. I think that, it might be relatively de-escalated, but mostly just because UK police have to account for every bullet fired.
I mean, you'll forgive me for bringing this to the 2020 election already, but how do we feel that the Black Lives Matter movement is going to impact on this? Because one thing I'm getting the impression might well happen is that Trump is going to turn this into a law and order election.
Yeah.
And frame it largely around that.
Yeah, I think Trump will try and use that to his attention. I think he'll try and, as Mason was saying, try and focus on the negatives of that, which is kind of a natural thing for him to do. It's also a terrible thing to do. But I think with the Democrats, I hope that there'll be members within the Democrats who realize the importance of what's going on and use that to push members who often don't get opportunities, to speak at conferences, to put themselves forward to be elected. I hope that they will get more of an opportunity because of that. That would be a great thing, because I think it's not going away.
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation to navigate because Trump is able to play, the law and order card to his advantage. If the Democrats play it, they alienate the massive number of people who do still believe in the protests.
Yes.
Yeah.
And those are votes they can't afford to lose.
Yeah. James, how are you feeling about Joe Biden at the moment? Because he's still doing quite well, right?
He is still doing quite well in the polls. I've seen some predictions from 538 who, there were issues with their predictions last time round, but they still got it the closest. They were the ones who gave Trump the best chance of winning, and he did. And in the previous 2 elections, they got it pretty much spot on. They're putting Joe Biden as the favourite to win. I think I will just look it up while we're talking, but I think at last count they had him down at about 70% chance of winning, which is roughly what they gave Clinton on the day of the election, to be fair. But I do think Biden is still the odds-on favourite. In my view, I'd put it somewhere like 55-45 or maybe even 60-40 in favour of Biden. It's going to be far from a landslide, but I think Biden is the marginal favourite still.
Yeah,
I'll agree with that. I think Biden's, notionally ahead. I also think that, the longer he's in the public spotlight, the more public support he hemorrhages, which has sort of been visible for a while now. His strategy in the DNC primaries was largely to keep out of the spotlight and let his campaign team handle it.
Is that
whether they'll work against Trump?
Because Trump is really good at attacking him.
Sleepy Joe.
Yeah.
It's got a lot more punch to it than Mr. Tweety.
Is that what he called Trump?
Something to that effect.
What was it he was calling Bernie? He was calling him Crazy Bernie, wasn't he? And then, of course, Elizabeth Warren was Pocahontas, which is a problematic nickname on so many levels.
Clinton was the crook.
Crooked Hillary, that was it.
Yeah, gosh. There should be a museum for just Trump attacks. There probably is somewhere, to be honest.
What were the other ones? Lying Ted, Little Marco. You know, he's good at coming up with those small insults. And what can I say? That's part of what his appeal was in 2016 to so many Republicans, is that this was too many politicians were too airbrushed, too seemingly civil. And he was just sort of the Republican Party's id in human form.
Here's a question. Would Joe Biden stand a greater chance of election if he, from now till the election, only tweeted in all capitals?
I'd like to see this. But he's doing his best to sort of present the image of being back to business as usual. I'll be a president who looks out for the people, sort of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of his message, is this will be a return to business as usual. I'm not sure how many Americans are going to get behind that, but hopefully it will be enough. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Joe Biden myself. He was, of the major Democratic candidates who actually stood a chance of getting the nomination, I think he would probably have been my bottom pick. At the same time, he'll be infinitely less bad than Trump. And as we said in a previous episode of this podcast, it'll be far easier to move the Overton window to the left under Biden than it will be under Trump. Yeah. I don't buy the whole line of another Trump term will bring on the revolution.
Yeah,
I just don't buy that.
Yeah. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but from memory, didn't Bernie perform better after Obama than he did after 4 years under Trump? Like, just in terms of voter shares in the primary.
Could be, yeah. I think I've heard that as well, yeah. Okay.
It's one thing interesting, sorry to just go off on a tangent again. Interesting about Bernie is I heard this statistic. This might need to be verified, but I think I'm right in saying Bernie this time round was the only candidate, at least in recent years, maybe ever, to win the first 3 popular vote in all first 3 primaries.
Oh.
He won the popular vote in Iowa, even though he was tied with Buttigieg for, was he tied or Buttigieg slightly edged it out in delegates? Of course, he won New Hampshire and then he won Nevada really convincingly. And at that point, it looked like, no, Bernie's got it. He's a shoo-in at this point. It's Sanders to lose, but then somehow Joe Biden pulled it round.
I mean, it wasn't Bernie versus Biden, though, was it? It was Bernie versus everyone else in the Democrats wearing a trench coat with Biden at the top.
Yeah, basically. With the possible exception of Warren and Yang and Marianne Williamson.
James, are you still updating your predictions for the elections on Redaction with state by state?
I did recently, yes.
Yeah.
I actually, my most recent update, I actually gave Biden an even bigger chance of winning than I did before. In fact, I made a slightly bold prediction in that this time round, I might have just been being contra here, but I predicted that Biden will flip Georgia.
Okay.
That was my bold prediction, because the polls are pretty close there. And I remember in 2008, everyone saying, no, there's no chance Obama will flip Indiana. And then it happened. And if we're on for a similar sort of victory for Biden, I can see it happening. I'm not seeing it happen with Texas, to be honest. And it would be a massive moment if Biden did flip Texas.
Well, how's Florida looking as well? Because that's a lot of points in the Electoral College, isn't it?
Well, that's the exact point, isn't it? Because of the 5 that yield the most points, what is it? California is the most solid Democrat. Texas is the second most, which is usually Republican. And then it's, New York, Florida, and Pennsylvania, is it? Or is it Illinois, the next one? But, I mean, most of the rest of them are solid blue. Florida, of course, is a swing state. And if Texas becomes competitive, then the Republicans have none of those top states under their belt.
Yeah, so for any of our listeners, make sure to check that out. James is keeping us updated with the election. Not long now, it's in November. So, yeah, give that a look on Redaction Politics.
It's the day before my birthday as well.
So hopefully we can give you a nice birthday present and Trump will be elected out. How nice would that be?
Oh, I know, right?
Another 4 years of the God Emperor.
Okay, another thing I've been seeing popping up recently is the government trying to look at how we're going to move forward with COVID, trying to suggest that people go back to offices and that university students perhaps go back when terms start. Obviously, there are big fears about what that's going to mean. Lots of people mingling in offices, and Freshers Week. Can you imagine all the mingling in students' unions and halls? I just can't imagine that's going to be very good. What do you make of that?
It's a terrifying thought. I checked the statistics on it this morning. Our number's still above 1. We've got more cases coming in today than we had at the start of the month. And under those circumstances, this was the condition that we were given when we were told that the economy would be reopened. We were told that it would be conditional, checked at each step along the way to make sure that the R number stayed below 1. It immediately went above 1. The government started meddling with statistics, misrepresenting data, and all of a sudden, we're not seeing any of that rhetoric anymore about, let's continue practicing proper safety procedures. Let's monitor the process at each step. None of that's happening. We're just being pushed back out there.
And one thing we've seen recently, there was a poll just out yesterday that for the first time in a while now, it was tied in the opinion polls, 40-40.
Yeah, I saw
Labour
that.
has now caught up.
Yeah, it's been a few years, hasn't it, since it's been at that point, I believe.
No. Labour were ahead quite a lot in the first half of last year.
Right.
But then they tanked after Boris Johnson took over the Tories. Obviously, it's too soon to read into that. It's just one poll. Never read too much into just one poll. Polls are only useful when considered in terms of trends. But, we can live in hope. Obviously, I think that at the moment, the thing to consider with Labour at the moment is that this is clearly a bad reflection on the government. I've still not seen Keir Starmer do that much, to be honest.
I mean, Starmer was in favour of reopening the schools.
And I think he still maintains that, am I right? Unless somebody wants to correct me on that.
I've not seen that statement be retracted, but It's been a few weeks since I've seen any headlines on it.
So, look, Starmer seems to be... We'll get onto the whole issue of the left and optics at the moment, and whether people on the left can get better optics without selling out on the issues. Starmer is somebody who is a case of all optics, no substance.
Yeah. I mean, is it the case that we might see that, though? I mean, he has been there for a few months now, and to be fair, it doesn't seem like much has happened. Of course, they had the government U-turn. Well, we've had many government U-turns, but the one specifically on free school meals, where Marcus Rashford, of course, helped out. That was quite a big thing.
I was about to say the real leader of the opposition there was Marcus Rashford.
Yeah, he did well there. Fair play to him. But I don't know. Are you hopeful that we're going to see more from Starmer? Because I'm kind of hoping that we will soon. I'd really like to see some ideas put out there.
Look, I want to see Starmer do well. I really do. He wasn't my pick for leader, but I still want to see him do well. I want to see him succeed. I want a Labour government. At the same time, he's not filling me with optimism at the moment. Like I say, he's clearly got the optics down to a T. Even though he looks almost stereotypically like what you'd expect a politician to look like, he's got a nice suit, a smart haircut, and whatnot.
Who better to bring back the working class voters in the north than a lawyer from London?
Who is a literal knight.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some problems with that, aren't there? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's what voters want, but I'm not convinced.
I mean, let's bear in mind that the Northern Heartlands flipped to the Tories under Oldie Tony and Alexander Boris the Pfeffel Johnson, man of the people. So, I think Keir Starmer is, to that end, it will be perfectly able to win back the Northern Heartlands on optics grounds. The question is whether he manages to on policy.
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder how. I mean, obviously the Conservatives in the previous elections have positioned themselves as anti-establishment, haven't they? Which is, I mean, such a bizarre and odd thing. Of course, they wanted to do that to win, and they wanted to do it to show that Labour are the elite. But I mean, come on, look at the people in cabinet. Look at the Prime Minister. What more privileged background could you be from?
Like that's been their line for the past 2 decades. We need to work hard to undo the damage of the last Labour government.
I think one of the key people we've got to consider in this picture of the Tories trying to present themselves as anti-establishment is Dominic Cummings.
Oh God!
Who's consistently run sort of anti-politician messages. I mean, you might have seen that speech he gave where he was literally lambasting the Tory party, saying, "Yeah, these people don't care about the NHS."
Yeah,
he clearly has quite deep disdain for politicians themselves, and attacking the professional political class worked well in their favour in the 2019 election, where when Labour came out with a second referendum policy, they could then attack Corbyn, who was seen beforehand as Mr. Anti-Establishment, as having sold out to the establishment. Say, look, he's just like all the rest of them. He's now subservient to Brussels. We're the anti-establishment, really.
Yeah, and that's kind of the battleground run, isn't it? But I mean, Cummings is a figure who, what he did in breaking the lockdown, and I know he had an excuse that he wanted his children to be in a safe place because he was worried that he had contracted the virus. But I mean, come on, driving into Durham with bad eyesight. I mean, how ridiculous can it be?
I mean, we were told that he's doing what any rational father would do, but we're also being told that a rational father trying to seek a better life for their kids should be blown out of the water by the United Kingdom's Navy.
Yes,
it's a complete double standard.
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely. Of course, on the subject of Cummings driving, though, I mean, does it really need to be said how irresponsible it is to get behind the wheel if you think your eyesight might not be good enough to drive?
I don't think, at this point, I don't think there's anything new we can say. I don't actually remember what the name of this scandal was called. Was it Cumgate?
Yes.
Okay.
Is that really what it was called?
Oh, yes, I saw that trending on Twitter at the time. #
Oh,
Cumgate.
Of course.
Oh, God. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we know what kind of effect that's had.
I mean, of course, Benedict Cumberbatch played Dominic Cummings in that film Brexit, the Uncivil War. And they're two people who were definitely teased at school for their surnames and for very similar reasons.
Yeah, definitely. All right then. Well, I mean, obviously we're kind of on the topic of optics now and how it looks. I mean,
yeah.
Do you think the left? Do you think like the left parties? I mean, I suppose in the UK we're particularly looking at the Labour Party. I mean, let's maybe start there. But do they know the image that they give out to the world? Do you think they're aware of some of the things that people throw at them, or do you think they just genuinely have no idea how the world sees them?
I think we're more talking. It's less a matter of the Labour Party now than it is sort of people on the sort of the bona fide left, not people sort of centre left, social liberals, sort of people on the hard left. I think do have a problem with optics often. I think we did see that to an extent with Corbyn. I mean, Corbyn was great on policy, but he was probably literally the poster boy for bad optics on the left.
Yes.
I mean, he looked like a scruff, wearing his beard, turning up in his miner's cap at demonstrations before. Obviously, he didn't do that when he was actually leader.
Glasses always slightly off.
Yes. And then, of course, when he opened his mouth as well, he didn't sound like a conventional politician. To some people, that was his appeal, but I don't think it was enough to enough people.
Yeah. And then there's the other optical note that whenever a prominent leftist comes forward, whether it's Corbyn or Sanders or who have you, we're consistently told that whatever fans they do have are a cult of personality, right? The Bernie Bros, the Corbynistas.
And I often think the hardcore Blairites who call Corbynism a cult of personality really do lack some sense of self-awareness there.
Yeah, I mean, that's got its own problems, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, according to the leaked WhatsApps, all of us are Trumps, aren't we? So.
Yeah. Did you see that tweet the other day? There was a tweet that something like "man arrested in London for war crimes." I can't remember who put it out there. And
let's not gear ourselves into slightly legally sketchy territory now, shall we?
Let's avoid that one then.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
We are, of course, talking about a hypothetical that is happening in a video game.
Yeah, that was my question. Exactly. Okay.
It was Ulfric Stormcloak who was arrested in London. We can now reveal.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how have the Conservatives done it better then? How have they managed to successfully convince the country that they are anti-establishment, that they are the voice of the working people? How the hell have they been able to do that for so long when it's quite obviously not true?
One word: Brexit.
Do you reckon that's what it comes down to?
Largely, I think, yes. Brexit was portrayed as it was a once in a generation chance to, send the proverbial middle finger to the professional political class and to the establishment. people took it, and therefore it came to be seen as this anti-establishment message, whereas Remain ran very heavily on, oh yes, the economic fallout is going to be terrible, you're going to lose your job and whatnot. If it was just a very eat your vegetables campaign, was the Remain campaign. It was very poor.
Yeah.
Whereas Leave had a very clear message. It was take back control. Arguably, it was always framed as being from Brussels, but I think it went deeper than that. I think there was an extent to which it was take back control from the professional political class, and I think that played into the sensitivities of a lot of people, especially those who were traditional Labour supporters but felt abandoned by the Blair government.
Yeah, I think those traditional Labour voters that you mentioned really had nowhere to go in that election, did they? Because on the whole issue of Brexit, many of them wanted to leave, but didn't know whether to look at the Labour Party, who struggled, didn't they, to be quite honest, with what stance they wanted to take. There was a lot of internal fighting on that. There wasn't ever really a clear position. The Conservatives perhaps benefited quite a lot by having their kind of, the Eurosceptics take control at that moment. And then there was only ever going to be one strategy for them. And that seemed to be the one that worked.
I think that's one very important point that we do need to include in our discussion of optics, because the right are a lot better at falling in line.
Yes.
Like, it has to be said.
Yeah.
Well, we saw that in the election. The Brexit Party withdrew in favour of the Tories. The Lib Dems and the Greens and Plaid Cymru and the SNP and Labour were a mess.
The Lib Dems explicitly went on the record to say that they wouldn't ally with Labour under any circumstances.
It's almost like the Lib Dems were more interested in stopping Labour than they were in stopping Brexit. But that's a discussion for another time. But of course, the Lib Dems had the alliance to Remain with the Greens and was it Plaid Cymru, but not the SNP, I think I'm right in saying. But no deal was worked out with Labour. The Brexit Party did it off their own back. It wasn't a deal with the Tories. Well, maybe there was behind closed doors, but it wasn't on the record. So, yeah, you're quite right, Mason. The right are far better at getting a rank and file when the time needs to be.
Yeah. We do need to include, to some extent, there is still internal opposition, but it's a lot more subdued. I mean, within the House of Commons, like Boris Johnson basically took down every MP that wasn't willing to stand behind him. And it shows now.
I mean, Boris Johnson achieved in 4 months what Corbyn failed to achieve in 4 years, which was to completely reshape the parliamentary party in his own image.
Yeah. Like, I mean, the circumstances of both are obviously not the same, right? Corbyn doing it would have been a media scandal. We'd be told that he was conducting Stalinist purges, thought policing his own people. When Johnson does it, it's kicking out the elitists.
I mean, I often say to people, imagine the different reaction from the press if it had been Corbyn that had unlawfully prorogued Parliament and lied to the Queen. But I think this is an important point to make, is that part of the thing the left has to consider with optics is that they do get held to a different standard by outsiders.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
Well, like we say, if Corbyn had attempted something like that, Stalinism would have been invoked. When Boris Johnson does that, a lot of people just get behind it and say he's trying to do the best thing for the country and the party. They do get held to different standards. And we've got to work with that rather than just moan about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they don't help themselves sometimes with that. I think you're absolutely right about it, but I think we've spoken about it before on this podcast about John McDonnell's Little Red Book and things like that, which doesn't help with the image, right? I mean, that's just completely shooting yourself in the foot, setting yourself up to be completely slandered. And as we saw, whether the Labour Party thought, okay, we can deal with this, they clearly couldn't. They clearly lost a lot of public opinion, and Corbyn just ended up looking like a nutter, frankly, didn't he?
I think when McDonnell did that, what it largely did for a lot of people was just confirm what they'd suspected about Corbyn and McDonnell. I mean, if you're being portrayed as a radical leftist, as a Stalinist, as a Maoist in the press, and you want to disprove that, the way you don't do that is whipping out Chairman Mao's Little Red Book in the House of Commons during a budget debate. What were you thinking, man?
Yeah, I know, James. I know that you quite admired Corbyn. I think for a lot of reasons, right? How for you did that kind of feel when we saw them kind of come out with mistakes like that, and really it felt to me like they undermined themselves in a lot of ways. That must have been incredibly disappointing.
I mean, in hindsight now, well, it's not even in hindsight. I do agree with that to an extent. I think, myself included, a lot of people felt the need to close ranks around Corbyn and McDonnell because he was the best chance we had. Corbyn was an imperfect vessel for progressive change, but he was a vessel nonetheless.